name's Joanne Lewohl and I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Medical Science, and I'm going to talk to you today about how I use Echo360 and the analytics that are built into Echo360 to look at the way that students are performing in my course. So a couple of years ago I was asked to be part of the Echo360 Active Learning Platform Early Adopter Program, and I leapt at the opportunity because I could see that some of the new functionality in Echo360 was going to help me achieve my goals when it came to teaching. And one of the things that I had noticed is that I had fewer and fewer students attending the in-person classes, and this wasn't because the students didn't like the course, didn't like the teaching, but more that they were just not there right from the beginning. So that for whatever reason they were choosing not to attend in person and were perhaps relying on other resources instead. And so one of the questions I had was, could I use Echo360 and some of the inbuilt tools to engage students and make it more interesting for them to come to class and maybe a value add to the lecture and workshop class experience. And in doing that, I was hoping that I could perhaps change students' perception of lectures and even improve the lecture capture recordings, and hopefully to get the students to contribute more during class. So the workshop classes were always intended to be interactive, but when you have 50% of the cohort sitting in a large lecture classroom, it's not always possible to get them to interact and to put their hand up and to contribute to the class. And I felt that using Echo360 would perhaps encourage them to participate in the class because they wouldn't have to speak up necessarily. They could just answer the polling questions as we went. And then with respect to analytics, we're looking at how attendance and the way that students were using the lecture capture recordings actually determined how they performed in the class. And so essentially the question of whether coming to class even matters. So this little video is really about the analytics. So I just wanted to show you how we use analytics in this course. So this is for my course, and when you navigate to the analytics tab, which is the top right hand side, there are a couple of different views that you can get, and this first one is looking at the classes. So this is each individual class in the list. You can see the list down the bottom here, and each of these bars on the graph represent different classes, and this is one, if you click on this, if this was live, you could click on all the different ones, and you can see the breakdown of some of the analytics just by looking at the graph. So this is our week 2 workshop class, and you can see the number of slide deck views, the number of polling responses and video views and those types of analytics. You can also download those analytics. You can see some of them down the bottom, but if you export the full data set, then you get a lot more detail and a lot more data for each of the classes. And that's what it looks like when you download the analytics by class. So the classes are down the left-hand side here, and then you've got some of the metrics, which I'll talk about in a moment, in an Excel spreadsheet, essentially. You also can look at various analytics by student view. So I've just blocked out the names of the students that would normally appear in this column here, and you can have a look at some of the analytics that are available for each student. When you click on the Export Full Data Set button at the top here, you actually get a lot more detail, and it breaks it down both by student and by class. So I'll show you what that looks like. Again, I've just squashed up some of the columns here so that you can't see the detail about the students' names. But you can see that you get a list of classes, and then you get a breakdown of all of the analytics for each of those classes for each individual student. So the spreadsheet's a little clumsy, but certainly all the data is there, and it's just a matter of manipulating the data and having a look at it. So just looking at attendance, so this is really just to set the scene, if you like. So this is not the Echo360 analytics, but the class roll that was circulated. And it's really just to look at the attendance over the 12 weeks of the trimester. And you can see that attendance fluctuates a lot. It hovers around, averages around about 45% of the cohort are physically present in the class across the 12 weeks. Some weeks it's substantially more, some weeks it's substantially less, but on average it's sort of around about 45% of the cohort, which in some instances may be considered to be quite high. The other thing that's really obvious is how consistent it is between the 2 years. So despite the fact that it fluctuates over 12 weeks, the pattern is really similar across the 2 years, which is interesting. So I use this data to look at, or to group the students based on their attendance behaviour. So they were just in 3 groups: attenders, or non-attenders, I should say, students who attended less than half of the classes in person and students who attended at least half of the classes in person. So this is actually greater than or equal to 50%. And this is just a category that we used for further analysis. The case study, so video views obviously are really interesting, and that case studies tend to be viewed quite a lot. It's a different type of learning style for a lot of students, and I noticed that students were going back and rewatching some of their workshop classes. And when you go in and look at the analytics of the individual videos, which is one of the options, there's an overlay of how much of the video is being watched, or the average. So you can see here that the vast majority of the video has been watched, and it's really just the end that tails off. But this is really important. So I think there's a difference between students who simply click on a video and maybe by accident and only watch 1 or 2% of it, to students who are using lecture capture to review key concepts, so on the leading up to an assessment item, for example, and students who are essentially using lecture capture to replace the lecture. So they don't attend lectures face-to-face or in person, but they are quite diligent in watching the entire lecture capture, so using it as a replacement. So this is an example of the type of data that you can export. So this is the 2019 data. Again, I've blanked out the student names down the side. So for each individual student, you can get the number of views, how long they viewed, the lecture capture duration. So in this instance, it was 106 minutes of the lecture capture, and then the percentage, which was the percentage of the video viewed. So what I did was I actually, rather than just count students who had viewed videos, because these are simply clicks, I actually coded students for each class that I was looking at. For all 14 classes, I coded them based on their lecture capture usage profile. So a 0 is a student who watched less than 10% of the video, so excluding students who perhaps clicked on it by accident or really haven't watched it at all. Students who were watching between 10 and 80% of the length of the video. So in my mind, these are students who are perhaps using lecture capture as a review tool. So just to review key concepts, or to double check things that they may feel that they have missed from the lecture or from the workshop class. And then those students who are watching the entire video. So I used 80% as a cutoff, and that's simply because this was the automated lecture capture system. So in some instances, the lecture capture ran for 2 hours, but I may have finished a few minutes early. So by setting it at 80%, it means that they've essentially watched the entire video, and maybe not. If they've left before it ended, it was just a small amount at the end that they didn't watch. So when I coded these students, I looked at this data in 2 different ways. So I'm looking at the total number of views per week. So remember that this is what the percentage of students, or the class percentage, who watch the entire video each week. So the percentage of the cohort who's doing that. So partial views were excluded, and we just looked at the average across the weeks, and you can see it's a little bit of difference between the 2 cohorts, but there is a fair percentage of the class who is watching the entire workshop video each week. And then I looked at lecture capture usage behaviour, if you like. So this is the total views by students. So again, the students were classified or grouped together based on the way that they were using their lecture capture. So the students in the lowest group didn't use lecture capture at all. Then I had students who watched fewer than 50% of the recordings across the trimester, and those who watched at least 50% of the recordings across the trimester. So again, this is just a grouping based on lecture capture behaviour. What was really interesting was when we combined the attendance behaviour and the lecture capture usage profile, then we came up with some really interesting results. So this is now looking at students are divided based on lecture capture usage across the bottom here. So students who never used it, those who use it less than 50% of the time, and those that use it more than 50% of the time. And the attendance profile is the line graph, so non-attenders, students who attend less than 50% of the time, and students who attend at least 50% of the time, and looking at their final grade. And what was really interesting is that the students in this group, so students who came to class more than 50% of the time, actually Some of them never used lecture capture at all. Some of them used it obviously for some topics and not others, so less than 50% of the time. But there was a fair percentage, about 20% of the class, who both came to the in-person classes but also watched the entire lecture capture recording, which I thought was really interesting. Quite a large number. The number of students who were actually using lecture capture and actually watching the entire lecture capture was also kind of surprising, and that included students who never came to class or rarely came to class. And essentially the take-home message is that lecture capture usage had absolutely no impact on the grades for students who came to class. Like students who didn't use it versus students who did use it was very much a straight line across here, and those students were obviously achieving at a very high rate. And students who rarely, if ever, came to class, so these groups down the bottom here, which was about 37% of the cohort, could perform as well as those who did come to class, but only really if they watched the entire lecture capture recording. So I haven't shown it here, but if you look at students who only watch bits and pieces of the lecture capture, then they don't reclaim their grades in anywhere close to the same extent. So just before I sign off, I just wanted to share with you some of the student opinions about lecture capture and usage. And bear in mind that this data was captured in 2018 and 2019, and I really strongly believe that student opinions have changed in 2020, and I've collected that data again this year, so that'll be interesting to look at as well. So I asked them a range of different questions, but I was particularly interested in their thoughts about the workshop classes and whether they were beneficial, so that applying their knowledge in a workshop format. I asked them, and you can see that the vast majority of students either agreed or strongly agreed. I asked them about the use of in-classroom interactive tools and how that helped them, and again, the vast majority of students agreed or strongly agreed. And I also asked them whether they felt attending class actually helped them rather than just reading through. Like, did they get any value out of coming to class? And you can see, again, the overwhelming majority of students agreed with that as well. On the flip side, I asked them, and again, this is pre-COVID affected 2020, so I asked them, since lectures and workshop classes were lecture captured, if they felt any real need to come to class, and they strongly disagreed with that statement, that there was no need to come to class. And I also asked them if they felt that face-to-face lectures and workshop classes were outdated in the modern era, and the 2018 and 2019 cohort were very adamant that they did not agree with that, and they didn't think that face-to-face classes were outdated at all. So what does this mean moving forward? And for those of you who are looking at new ways to teach in 2020 and 2021 and beyond, what I did differently this year was that the lectures were pre-recorded and available online, obviously, and students watched them asynchronously, so whenever they felt that they needed to. But the theory for the class was actually available in 3 different ways. The pre-recorded lectures, obviously, for those students who liked that format. I also created interactive lessons that were hosted in Microsoft Sway that had embedded video and other interactivity, including quizzes and those sorts of things. So for students who like that more upbeat, more interactive format. And because we didn't really know what the circumstances would be like in terms of whether we would be able to go to campus or not, or whether we may even have been in lockdown, I also provided the content of the sways and the pre-recorded lectures with no interactivity as an ebook that they could, if they needed to, they could go out and print a copy of in case, they didn't have great internet connectivity or perhaps we were in lockdown. And this was all done well in advance of T2 actually starting. So this year, again, I delivered workshop classes, but they were delivered live and online via Collaborate. And we still used Echo360, and we still used all of the interactivity. So students joined the live class and then had a separate screen where they could answer questions in Echo360 and follow along. It worked really well, and with the added advantage of having the chat function in Collaborate. So we had questions being asked in the chat as well as the students answering questions in Echo360. So in order to be able to do the analytics again this year, I downloaded the recordings from Collaborate and uploaded them into Echo360, and they were only available through Echo360 so that again I could capture all of the same data in terms of the number of views and the percentage of the video that was viewed and those sorts of things. And attendance, obviously, we had no face-to-face classes this year, but attendance is available via Collaborate session, so you can download a report that tells you who was logged on and who wasn't for each individual session, which again is quite useful. So there was no class roll as such, but I still have attendance metrics. And the other thing that I did was a little bit different to previous years, is that I downloaded the Echo360 analytics both for the classes and the students every week, and I did that every Monday morning. So we have now 14 data points, or 15 data points, because I included O week before the class started, as well as the Monday after, Monday of week 13 or in swap back, and the day after the end of trimester exam, just for comparison. And that's really because the question now is, how are students using those resources? Are they keeping up to date and doing them, reviewing the content weekly, or are they using a just-in-time kind of the day before the assessment item, madly trying to review the content? So that's just a summary of how I use Echo360 and how I've used the Echo360 analytics, and thank you for your attention.